Hey everybody, welcome to End Times Bible Study. My name's Diane, and thanks so much for joining me today for our weekly Bible study. So we have an exciting topic tonight. I actually love studying the Bible and studying all the end times prophecies is just really cool. But we're going to be talking today about what is the one country delivered from the Antichrist and why. And I've discovered some really interesting information to share with y'all. So the answer to that is actually found in Daniel 11:41. And as we will see, that is the country of Jordan. So we're going to start today with a very brief timeline of the tribulation as it applies to this topic. Then a short discussion on why the Bible is pointing to the rise of the Antichrist from Turkey. Then we're going to read part of Daniel 11, and then we'll take a brief look at the ancient kingdoms of Moab, Ammon, and Edom, which are the countries described as being delivered from the Antichrist, which that's corresponding with modern day Jordan. And then we will conclude with possible reasons about why Jordan is delivered from the hand of the Antichrist. So, all right, so let's start out with a quick timeline review of the tribulation. So, the tribulation, contrary to what many people seem to think, it has not started yet. The book of Revelation actually starts in chapter 6 with the opening of the seven seals, and the first seal that's opened is the rider on the white horse, and that is the Antichrist. All right, so the tribulation is going to kick off with the rise of the Antichrist, and then we're also going to see from Daniel 9:27, and I'm going to pull up a bunch of scriptures. So let me make myself smaller here, and we are going to we're going to go really fast through these. Let me see here. Pull up. Okay, here we go. All right, so Daniel 9, there's an amazing book of prophecy. I've covered this extensively in the past, so I'm not really going to go into a huge amount of detail today. We're just going to look at the end of this chapter, verse 27, which is talking about the Antichrist. But this chapter has the prophecy of the 77s prophesied for Israel and Jerusalem. So it's a total of 490 years. When you see the word week, it means a period of 7 years. So they've all everything has been fulfilled for Jerusalem and Israel except the final 7 years, which is corresponding to the tribulation. So we see in verse 27, it says, and he, now the he is referring to the Antichrist here, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. So 1 7-year period. But in the middle of the week, so 3.5 years into the tribulation, the Antichrist, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of the temple will come the abomination that causes desolation until the decreed destruction is poured out upon him. So, and I didn't pull this verse up, I'm just going to read it out of my Bible. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, also talking about the Antichrist, who's described as the man of lawlessness, the son of destruction. But it says in chapter 2, verse 4, he will oppose and exalt himself, meaning the Antichrist, above every so-called God or object of worship. So he will seat himself in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. So that seems to be more of an explanation because, what does that mean? He's going to desolate the temple and so forth. So obviously, a rebuilt Jewish temple, and there's been a lot of stuff in the news lately about, the Jews just went, they're not really allowed on the Temple Mount too much, only in small numbers, and I don't think they're allowed to pray. And there's a whole, bunch who went up there more than the allowed number, and they prayed, they were prostrating themselves on the ground, and this caused a big uproar because it's like, well, this isn't what's allowed, and blah blah. But and the Jews are also saying, there's a whole temple institute where they're planning to rebuild the temple. So all these things are lining up for the fulfillment of these scriptures. So all right, so that's the how the tribulation starts, what happens at the midpoint. Now let's take a quick look at Matthew 24. So we've covered these extensively, done several studies on like Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, which are all three parallel accounts of Jesus talking about what's going to happen in the end times. So, so Jesus says in verse 15, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination of desolation described by the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. I think it means the reader of Daniel, like this is Jesus giving us this information about the timing of this and referring back to the timeline that Daniel gave so we can put all this stuff together. So we know that this will occur from Daniel at the middle of the tribulation. So verse 16, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop come down to retrieve anything from his house, and let no one in the field return for his cloak. How miserable those days will be for pregnant and nursing mothers. Pray your flight does not occur in the winter on the Sabbath. So again, notice that this is addressed to people living in Israel at the time of the tribulation. And so this is Jesus saying, okay, you need to be getting out of Dodge. And that's also correlating with Revelation 12. Let me pull that one up. Because Revelation 12, you have the woman and the dragon. The woman is Israel, the dragon is Satan. And so, and then just for a quick context, I mean, it has the war in heaven with Michael fighting against Satan, the dragon is definitely defined in verse 9 as Satan. So then we see down in verse 13, and when the dragon saw that he had been thrown to the earth, he pursued the woman, Israel, who had given birth to the male child. So Israel is the one who brought forth Jesus the Messiah. But the woman, Israel, was given 2 wings of a great eagle to fly from the presence of the serpent to her place in the wilderness, where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time. The final 3.5 years of the tribulation, whatever Jews do flee out of the city will be taken care of supernaturally. Now, this is important. The reason I'm going into this is because it is believed by many biblical scholars that when the Jews flee, they may be going into Jordan. All right, so we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But let me look at Luke 21:20, because again, this is giving us even more information. So, and I don't really think this heading, the destruction of Jerusalem, is correct, because this is not talking about the 70 AD complete destruction of Jerusalem. This is talking about the midpoint of the tribulation when Jerusalem is going to be invaded by Muslim forces and trodden down. So they're taken over, not destroyed. So, but notice the similarity of language to what I just read you from Matthew. For those of you who want to believe this refers to something else, because the context is clear in all 3 passages. It's all 3 are talking about the exact same thing. But Luke is giving us a little bit more information, which we're going to correlate that with some other scriptures here in a second. All right, verse 20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you will know that her desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country stay out of the city. For these are the days of vengeance, to fulfill all that is written. How miserable those days will be for pregnant and nursing mothers. For there will be great distress upon the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. All right, so now we're going to see the correlation in the Old Testament about the captivity, and that's Zechariah chapter 14. All right, so verses 1 and 2. Behold, a day of the Lord is coming when your plunder will be divided in your presence. For I will gather all the nations for battle against Jerusalem, and the city will be captured, the houses looted, and the women ravished. This is just what Luke was talking about. Half the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be removed from the city. Now, we've seen this on a smaller scale happen already this past October 7th with Hamas invading into Israel. And they they took hostages, which, over 100 of those hostages are still in captivity right now. So then they also raped a bunch of women. They committed horrible atrocities and so forth. So we see that this sort of thing is certainly capable of happening in the 21st century. And it indeed is lining up for what sadly will happen. Honestly, this passage is heartbreaking to think of this happening to Jerusalem. Sorry, but anyways, that is what it is saying is going to happen, and we see from all these correlations it's happening at the midpoint. Let me try to compose myself here. Sorry, I do cry easily. Revelation 11 also is correlating because so this is John the disciple who's writing Revelation. He says, "Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff and was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar." Again, a temple is here in the end times. Now, John's already, this is written around 90 AD. He's already lived through the complete destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. So clearly he's seeing another temple now in the end times. So he says, verse 2, "But exclude the courtyard outside the temple, do not measure it, because it has been given over to the nations," meaning the Gentiles, "and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. Again, 3.5 years, the final, what's referred to as the Great Tribulation, the final 3.5 years of the tribulation." So, so we see all those correlations there. So midpoint, there's this invasion. Then Revelation 19, I'm not going to go there, but that is when Jesus does physically return with all of the, armies of heaven, with the saints accompanying him. And he, in Armageddon, all the Antichrist and his forces are gathered outside of Jerusalem at that point, or, and that kind of seems to me from studying the prophecies more in that kind of southern area of Israel, because also Bozrah, which is located in modern day Jordan today, we'll get to that. That's also mentioned in the prophecies. So there's this kind of huge, massive, army that's there. They have gathered to fight against Jesus Christ, is what the Bible says. And Jesus will come down from heaven, and he's going to snatch the Antichrist's soul, the soul out of the Antichrist and the false prophet, and it goes directly into the lake of fire. He doesn't even need to kill them. He's just, with his mouth, with his words, he makes that happen. And then Jesus actually does kill the rest of the forces there arrayed, the Antichrist forces. So, and we've gone into all this and other things, other teachings. So I have a lot of stuff on my channel. I have a whole playlist on Daniel, actually, where it's verse by verse through the entire book, and Revelation, and a bunch of other prophecies too. I'm about to start a new series on Revelation, where, I did it before a couple years ago, but I'm going to do another one. So I'm excited about that. That's going to be starting up right after Labor Day. But anyways, all right. So why does the Antichrist appear that he is arising from Turkey? So, let me just make myself big for a second. I was going to look at all his verses and stuff, and I was like, the video was going to be really long. So I'm just going to try to summarize things. You can go back and look up these verses on your own. But Daniel chapter 2 is King Nebuchadnezzar, who has conquered Judah and Jerusalem, and Daniel was taken into captivity by the Babylonians. So he's there in the king's palace, and Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of a statue. He wants his wise men and magicians to tell him what his dream was and then interpret it, which they're like, we can't do this. So God gives Daniel the interpretation. So Daniel is able to interpret the dream. So it's this massive statue, and what it meant was it represented 4 major empires, with a revised end times empire that's attached to the 4th empire that's shown here. And so the gold head of the statue was Babylon. That was identified clearly. Then the statue had chest and arms of silver. And that, later in Daniel, there's references to Medo-Persia and Greece. Those were the next two empires that came because Medo-Persia conquered Babylon while Daniel was still in captivity. So then he's under the Medo-Persian Empire. But the belly and thighs were bronze, so that's Greece. And then it had legs of iron, and then the feet are part clay, part iron. So the feet with the 10 toes, that seems to be correlating with the 10 kings that we see later in Daniel chapter 7, or the 10 horns, which are 10 kings and so forth. And also like Revelation 17 is also talking about those 10, the 10 kings and so forth. So all that seems to correlate. So it's clearly the end times empire is coming out of this fourth empire. Now the fourth empire is never named. Traditionally, it's been thought. I mean, most and a lot of people still think this, and maybe it is the case. It could be Rome. That was the next empire that conquered Greece. Um, but the interesting thing is that Rome was actually conquered by the Ottoman Empire. So it's possible it could be the Ottoman Empire instead of Rome. And I will say with Rome that it was such a vast kingdom that they had like a ruler for the west and a ruler for the east. Well, the western half of the empire met its demise. I think if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember the date for sure, but I think it was like 476 AD. So that one finally fell. It was like, was it the Goths or those barbarian tribes or something? So they fell out. Well, the Eastern Roman Empire, the capital was located in Constantinople, which is in modern day Turkey, now renamed Istanbul and conquered by the Ottoman Turks. But I mean, that empire chugged along for like another 1,000 years. So, in a sense, if you're like, okay, well, I think the Fourth Empire is Rome, well, I would say, yeah, the eastern part of the Roman Empire, which today is Turkey is Islamic. So, so we have that Turkey pops up a lot with these different connections. So either way, I mean, probably have to wait to see how it plays out. But I do think this is all everything and what we see lining up currently is all lining up for an Islamic Antichrist invading into Israel and a worldwide Islamic jihad, which is literally already starting. So sometimes some of these things, we kind of look at what we think the Bible's saying, what it's pointing to, and you don't want to just interpret things based on current events, so to speak, because things can change. But I will say that that's how it's looking. So, all right. So, let me see. All right. So that was point one, is just the Daniel empires. Now, number two on that would be when I did that Daniel study, when you really go through it verse by verse and chapter by chapter, to me, this pattern emerged that I had not noticed prior to just kind of, well, I had read it through, but you know what I mean? Like just really studying it and sometimes just looking at certain chapters. But both Daniel chapter 8 and Daniel chapter 11, they appear to be talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, who's an Antichrist prototype. We'll talk more about him in a second, but he it's like seems like it's talking about him and then it just morphs into talking about the actual Antichrist, because it'll have some things that were fulfilled in history, but then things that are clearly that are unfulfilled that are still to come. And but he was a ruler of the Seleucid Empire. I never know if it's Seleucid or Seleucid. I think it might be Seleucid. But that empire, which was one of the, okay, after Alexander the Great died, so he conquered this massive amount of land. Then he died at age 33, and then it was kind of eventually parceled out to like mainly to four of his generals. And the Seleucid Empire seemed bigger than most of the other ones. I'm gonna show you a picture of it here. But Antiochus Epiphanes was an evil ruler. Sorry, I usually try to have these. Oh wait, I gotta make myself smaller before I can pull these up. All right, let me see which one it was. Okay, sorry. There we go. That's the one I want. Whoops. Okay, there's the map. I was like, wait, what happened to the map? Okay, so here's a map of this area. And Antiochus Epiphanes ruled from 175 to 163 BC. And so he was a very evil ruler who did desolate the temple. So there's kind of that foreshadowing, I guess, or, that this is what the Antichrist will do. So everything, like I said, it seems like okay, here's the antichrist, here's this evil antichrist prototype, and now it's suddenly talking about the antichrist in both Daniel 8 and 11. So his final capital, I'm going to use my mouse here, pointer here. So I think it was somewhere, it's currently in modern day Turkey is where his capital would be today. I mean, at the time it was, I think, more considered part of Syria, and it was, I think, around this vicinity, somewhere right in here. It was called Antioch was his capital, and today it's in Turkey. It's modern day Antakya. So, and they've had a lot of earthquakes there, but you can see how big this kingdom was. And then, so he's known as the king of the north. Daniel 11 goes through a whole bunch of stuff with the king of the north and the king of the south. And the king of the south is down here with Egypt, and that was the Ptolemy Empire. And then these were the other two up here. But anyways, again, you're seeing the Antichrist prototype capital city today in modern day Turkey. Like I say, Turkey just keeps popping up quite a bit. Now, in Ezekiel 38:39, again, I wanted to go look at all this, but it's going to take too much time. So just a brief synopsis. And I've done Ezekiel 38:39. That's on my channel where I went through those verse by verse, and it was amazing because I'd always bought into the kind of traditional teaching that, well, Gog is Russia, and he's part of this coalition that's going to invade Israel, and along with Turkey and Iran and some other countries. And then God will miraculously deliver Israel. And then that, that's happening either before the tribulation starts or maybe right at the beginning or something. Well, it's like, okay, that just wasn't making sense to me when, like, okay, well, Israel's going to be invaded at the midpoint of Jerusalem of the tribulation and completely overrun. So I was like, I don't really see how this is fitting in. So I think really when I started reading it for myself without that bias and looking at what the text actually says, Gog really does appear to be the Antichrist. And I did find someone else who was on the same wavelength. Other people are too. In fact, this endtimesbible.com commentary where this map is found, it's very good. And this guy, he said he took a year off of work and he took all the passages in the Bible dealing with end times and wrote like this little commentary. And it's really helpful and really good. So, but Joel Richardson, I really like his books, and when I started researching, well, does anybody else think Gog is the Antichrist? He was one that was also on that same bandwagon. So assuming that is the case, then the countries, okay, Gog just means ruler, so it's the ruler of Magog. And so it says, Gog of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. And so we're going to look at some maps dealing with that. Okay, and this actually is like a file from Joel Richardson, and I have I put all my sources in the description box. You can go find any of these sources and look them back up as well. But so these are the countries mentioned. That's not working. Let me do this. Okay, so in the Ezekiel 38:39 prophecy, it lists, okay, Gog of Magog, chief prince Meshach and Tubal. Then it also lists Gomer and Togarmah, which all of these seem to be correlating with modern day Turkey. So again, if you're trying to make a point of the Antichrist is coming from Turkey, I mean, like I said, all these things kind of add up to show Turkey, Turkey, Turkey is what's being pointed to for the Antichrist. Now, we also have Persia mentioned, which is basically modern day Iran. And then we also have, and you've got Israel, I guess, kind of down here with their map is kind of hard to understand. We'll look at a different map in a second. But also then it's trying to show the compass that these nations are almost surrounding Israel, basically. And then Libya, which is referred to as Put in the Bible, and then Sudan, which is referred to as Cush, or it'll say Upper Nile region. All right, so then he goes on with a whole bunch of different atlases that also show the same things. This is IVP Atlas of Bible History. Then this one is the New Moody Atlas of the Bible. Again, you can see Meshach, Tubal, Magog, Gomer, Togarmah, all there in that vicinity, either Turkey proper or close to it. This one's the Holman Bible Atlas. We see the same thing. So again, we're not just making this stuff up. There's a lot of other biblical resources all pointing to the same thing. The Zondervan Atlas of the Bible. Then we have ESV Bible Atlas, showing very similar. HarperCollins Atlas of Bible History. So there's that. And then he has the Baker's Bible Atlas. I actually have that book. And there, that's showing it. Macmillan Bible Atlas, very similar. That one looks like they have maybe Togarmah, Tubal, a little bit maybe outside of where modern day Turkey would be. And then this one would be the IVP New Bible Atlas. So I think so that's pretty much it. So that was an interesting article, and that just is showing. So again, more indication about the Antichrist coming from Turkey. So, and then point 4 under this section is just that all of the end times action is taking place in the Middle East. When you read all these different passages, I mean, Daniel 11, which we'll look at, Ezekiel 38, 39, places in Joel, even stuff that's discussed in Revelation. Revelation is talking about, once the tribulation starts, it's all talking about Jerusalem and the 144,000 Jews that are sealed and the 2 witnesses in Jerusalem and, all this stuff. So it's, the remnant fleeing in Revelation 12. So it's all about the nation of Israel. And again, if you think about it, the Daniel 9 prophecy, the final 7 years is prophesied for Israel and Jerusalem. Okay, it's not prophesied for the church. It's not prophesied for any other country. That is who it's prophesied for. So this is what it's centering on. All right, so now let's look at the context. We're going to talk about Daniel. So just to give the context, Daniel 10 through 12, those are the last 3 chapters in Daniel. They are all part of the same narrative. So Daniel 10 is essentially where Daniel's by the river Tigris. He has this vision of a mighty angel, and he's completely overwhelmed. He falls down. Fell down as as if he was asleep, I think, face down on the ground. So it sounds like he actually passed out. And I mean, he's so overwhelmed with this vision of the angel. There's also some very interesting information in there about the spiritual warfare aspect of things. So that's a cool chapter. But Daniel 11 is really what we're going to talk about, because the verses 1 and 2 of that, it's discussing the angel's like coming to give him this message. So then he really starts the message in chapter 11. So verses 1 and 2, he discusses some more Persian kings that will arise, because at this point in time, Daniel is now under the rule of the Medo-Persian Empire. So he's got to be pretty old, by the time this has happened. So then verses 3 through 20 are talking about the Greek Empire that was coming next, and it goes on about the king of the north and the king of the south. And it has very specific prophecies that were accurately fulfilled in history, so much so that there have been, of course, doubters who are like, well, the actual Daniel back in the original time period when he lived, could not possibly have written this because these are so accurate. So it must be someone later, or, whatever, because those are the people who don't understand that our God knows the beginning from the end, and he's told us. And so we have all this information, and even Jesus fulfilled over like 100 Old Testament prophecies that have been given accurately. So, the Bible's full of it. And that's why it's actually exciting to study Bible history, Bible prophecy, because you can see all this. And we know if all those were fulfilled, we know that the final ones still to come will be fulfilled as well. So, but then starting in like verse 21, I might go ahead and pull up Daniel 11. That's when we start seeing like 21 through 35 now is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, and those events through verse 35 were fulfilled in history through Antiochus. All right. But then in verse 36, it starts talking, it's those 36 through 45 through the rest of it. I hope I'm not confusing it. Let me pull that up there. Those verses have not been fulfilled yet. All right. So it's clearly an end times fulfillment. You see the king who exalts himself starting in verse 36. Now, I do want to mention, if you back it up, it does talk about the abomination that causes desolation. Let's see. Yeah, in verse 29. And I think I'm not the only one who thinks this. I mean, it's it's very likely that the stuff talking about Antiochus starting in verse 21 could be foreshadowing the actual Antichrist and kind of recapitulating what could be happening. Because again, the abomination that causes desolation is talked about, like verse 31, his forces will rise up and desecrate the temple fortress. They will abolish the daily sacrifice and set up the abomination of desolation. All right, now chapter 12 is kind of the conclusion of this whole thing, and the angel is still talking with Daniel, and he does talk about the abomination that causes desolation. So he seems like he's referring to, because like I said, Jesus referred to this as still a future event. If this was already all just fulfilled by Antiochus, Jesus wouldn't have been talking about it as an event still to come. Okay, so that's an important point. So anyways, so then in verse 36, we're going to pick up with that because this is definitely where it's talking about the Antichrist. Then the kings, this is the king of the north. So again, that's, the Antichrist prototype, king of the north, will do as he pleases and will exalt and magnify himself above every god. Now remember that verse I read in 2 Thessalonians 2:7. And he will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been decreed must be accomplished. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, nor for the one desired by women, which is typically understood to be referring to Jesus, because the Jewish women all wanted to be the one to bring forth the Messiah. So, nor for any other God, because he will magnify himself above them all. And in their place, he will honor a God of fortresses, a God his fathers did not know, with gold, silver, precious stones, and riches. He will attack the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign God, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him, making them rulers over many and distributing the land for a price. So again, we don't even know how like borders might be changing during this tribulation period, or it's going to be a whole upheaval. Verse 40, at the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle. Now remember, the king of the south was the Ptolemy Empire, where Egypt. So presumably Egypt is going to somehow try to resist the Antichrist. But the king of the north, the Antichrist, will storm out against him with chariots, horsemen, and many ships, invading many countries and sweeping through them like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land. That's Israel. So again, we know that's going to happen at the midpoint of the tribulation. And then again, the forces arrayed at Armageddon. And many countries will fall, but these will be delivered from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the leaders of the Ammonites. So I personally have never heard anyone actually talk about that verse as far as Edom, Moab, and the leader. Like, why would these countries be delivered? And I started thinking about that and then researching. So we'll get more into that in a second. Let me just finish reading the thing. He will extend his power over many countries, and not even the land of Egypt will escape. He will gain control of the treasures of gold and silver and over all the riches of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites will also submit to him. So again, the Libyans and the Cushites, those are the ones talked about as part of the Gog-Magog alliance. But news from the east and north will alarm him. and he will go out with great fury to destroy many and devote them to destruction. He will pitch his royal tents between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain, but he will meet his end with no one to help him. So again, we notice that it's a couple interesting things out of these two verses. So news from the east and the north. All right, well, if you're talking about Turkey being the central location for the Antichrist, in terms of he's coming out of Turkey, the only countries to the north of Turkey are actually Ukraine and Russia. So it doesn't really seem that Russia is part of this whole invasion situation. And maybe, and I'm not even sure by the time this happens, Ukraine, the whole situation could end with Ukraine being completely taken over by Russia anyway. So it might just be Russia at that point. We'll see. We'll see how all this plays out. But this whole war is still raging on. But then it says he will pitch his royal tents between the sea, meaning, oh gosh, now when I did this before, I can't remember if it was the Mediterranean Sea or the Dead Sea, but it was one of those. And then the beautiful holy mountain is referring to, I think, probably Mount Zion. But anyways, he's the key point here, because sorry, I'm a little fuzzy on the details from when I did this before. But the key point is the Antichrist is there in Israel for the Battle of Armageddon. And we know, like I said, we know he's there in Revelation 19. If assuming Gog is indeed the Antichrist, he also dies there in Israel. I mean, the coincidence on these things are just too much to ignore. That it's all talking about the same thing. And there's some other um, uh, things we could go into, but we'll leave it with that. So, all right. So let's take a look. Just some quick stuff about Jordan, and because really I didn't know anything about Jordan. You never really hear too much about them, honestly. At least I haven't. Um, but so I was doing some research. So again, I'm not an expert on this, and if I say anything you think isn't correct, or you have other information, or you know more about Jordan than I do, which is very possible, feel free to put some comments, some in the on the video and so forth. But as far as Jordan goes, in 1946, they gained their independence from Britain. Because originally, okay, back to the Ottoman Empire, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. And then when that broke up at the end of World War I, Britain had a lot of things over there in the Middle East, like, because even the whole, area of Israel today, it's called Palestine, like they were kind of over that area and obviously over Jordan. So in 46, they got their independence from Britain and became officially known as the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So they have actual kings in Jordan. And the country captured and annexed the West Bank during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War until it was occupied by Israel in 1967. So again, Israel comes back as a nation in 1948. And as memory serves, it wasn't too long before a lot of the nations there attacked Israel and tried to take them out, and they were unsuccessful. I mean, I do think God is supernaturally protecting Israel, and it will continue to be supernaturally protected until that midpoint invasion, which is foretold. And then Jesus comes back at the end, and then he rescues the remnant Jews, and they finally realize that's their Messiah, and they collectively come to salvation. That's described in Zechariah chapter 12. So individually and collectively come to salvation. I mean, salvation is through faith in Jesus Christ, and then they're finally going to recognize him as the Messiah. So, but anyways, so Jordan renounced their claim to the territory to the Palestinians in 1988 and signed a peace treaty with Israel in 1994. Oh, and that's right. I wanted to show you a map because I want to show you the map is really interesting when you see Israel today. Let's see. Okay, here we go. All right, so you see this kind of, I'll use my mouse here, this kind of purplish area. That is the West Bank. this is the area that Jordan was in control of, and then they turned it over to the Palestinians. So it's under like Palestinian control. Now notice Jerusalem is right here. Now here's Jordan over here, and this is their capital, Ammon. Okay, remember the Bible prophecy in Daniel says the leader of the Ammonites. Now they had O-N, this one has A-N, but still their original capital I think was right here. We're going to look at some other maps that are older in a second. But like it's like okay, wow. But anyways, you've got the Sea of Galilee up here. You've got like the Jordan River flowing down, and that the Jordan River is kind of the dividing line here, and it flows into the Dead Sea. So now, if you look over here, you see Gaza, and it's interesting because Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, those are all still existing cities today. Same with Hebron, Bethlehem, Jerusalem. I mean, it's like amazing how far back these cities actually go. Beersheba, that they've been going essentially for thousands of years. But I will say, if you want to talk about a Muslim invasion of Israel at the midpoint, you've got this whole area right here, this West Bank, and you've got the Hamas area. I mean, although who knows what the situation will be with Gaza, like how all this is going to end, because they're trying to basically disarm them and make sure that area is no longer a haven for terrorists, but it's a big job. But Jerusalem is already practically surrounded. Okay. So, all right, so let's take a look at this map that shows, okay, this shows all three of them. Let me try to see if I can kind of show this map a little bit better. All right, so this is showing you the kingdom of Israel in blue. Now, originally there was, I think, two tribes that were to the east of the Jordan River, because you've got the Jordan River going through here, and then you have modern day Jordan today. So originally Israel did extend into there. You had the kingdom of Ammon, okay? Then you have the kingdom of Moab, and then down here the kingdom of Edom. Now Edom originally was not, I think that it was more like this area. It did not extend into Judah. What happened was the Nabatean Arabs like basically kind of crushed Edom and drove the survivors kind of moved into Judah, and then we had people from Edom living in that vicinity uh, of today's, Israel, and that became known. The Greeks called it the Idumeans, so they had the kingdom of Idumea at that point, and then eventually, after Judah was wiped out, some of the Idumeans were trying to help the Jews in Jerusalem with the Roman assault, and they seem like they pretty much fell out. Like the kingdom of Edom didn't exist anymore. Of course, neither did the kingdom of Israel exist anymore after the Romans, because they basically leveled it, finally expelled all the Jews or forbid them from returning, and many were sold into slavery, many killed, and they were dispersed. So to have them come back in 1948 was nothing short of miraculous. But okay, but then over here you've got in the red, the Philistine, you've got Judah here. So this was kind of, back at the time when Israel was more at its peak, in a sense, with having that territory over into what's now modern day Jordan. So let me take a look at the next one. So that was, now Moab and Ammon, actually, if you remember from Genesis, those two guys that they're, like, okay, Lot and his family had to flee out of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot and his daughters end up living in this cave. And then the daughters, I guess, were feeling like, gee, there's no one for us to marry. We want to have kids. So they got their father drunk, like 2 nights in a row. They went and slept with the father. And so the two sons that were born to those girls was Moab and Ammon. So those countries were founded on that. And then Edom was from Jacob's brother Esau, that he was the founder of Edom. So, All right, so yeah, so as far as Ammon, as I said, Ammon today is the capital of Jordan. It says the leaders of Ammon are delivered from the hand of the Antichrist. I'm like, that's an interesting way to put that. So is this a clue that, in other words, the leaders are the people in the capital. So they are delivered. And then Edom, so let me see on Edom what I have. Edom, the capital of Edom was Bozrah. And apparently today it seems to be more called Busera, but it's all just ruins, So these are the ruins of Bozrah. And and like I said, Bozrah does figure in a lot of Old Testament prophecies. I'll put some links also in the description that give more information because there's one guy, he goes through like all the prophecies about Edom in the Bible, and there was some good information there, but we don't really have time to get into it. So all right, now, so as far as the remnant of believing Jews, or believing or otherwise, the Jews who flee at the midpoint of the tribulation, it's believed that they may be going into possibly Petra. And Petra is a fascinating city. I'm going to show you a little short clip of this video. It's called Amazing Jordan, the Strangest Country in the Middle East, question mark. But this is the lost city of Petra, one of the wonders of the world, built in the middle of the desert. So let me see if I can play this.
And buried for centuries in the sand.
Oh, sorry, we have to have a commercial because I don't have like commercial free YouTube.
Hey, there's a company giving away a mini solar generator for free, and it comes.
Okay.
Sea, as it can be accessed by Jordan, Egypt, Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. The Red Sea is famous for appearing in the second book of the Bible,
wait.
the book of
Sorry.
Exodus.
I'm at the wrong place. Okay. This is going back to the...
Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, who had learned to speak Arabic, was traveling with the intention of exploring the Niger River when he heard stories of a dead city containing the tomb of the prophet Aaron. He became fascinated with the story and set out to find the city. Dressed as a local and speaking only Arabic, he told his guide that he wanted to take a goat to sacrifice in honor of Aaron's tomb. On August 22nd of that same year, he arrived at the city. In his writings, he said, "An excavated mausoleum appeared, whose situation and beauty are calculated to cause an extraordinary impression on the traveler." To reach the lost city, one must traverse a narrow gorge called the Zik, no more than 9.8 feet wide. It meanders to Petra's treasury, or Al-Khazna, the city's most iconic structure. Believed to have been a temple or the royal tomb of Nabatean King Aretas IV, but this is just one of the city's constructions.
Okay, so that's all I'm gonna play, but I thought like just there's this 9 foot area to get into the city. So I mean, again, it remains to be seen if this will be how it plays out, but that could be a reason why, if the Jews have fled into Jordan, that the Antichrist and his forces are still after them. And, maybe, but, because does seem interesting that they flee and then the Antichrist seems to be nearby, but that's a little bit of speculation. All right, so we're going to just say, all right, now talk about why is Jordan delivered? And this part is just speculation on my part because, we can't really say for 100% certainty. This is just what I was thinking based on all this information I discovered. But all right, number one, Jesus tells the remnant to flee in Matthew 24, and we see them flee in Revelation 12 as well, the final 3.5 years of the tribulation. So again, what I was just saying, there's Old Testament references to Jesus going to Bozrah when he returns. So it's possible that's where the Jews are, in Petra, which is fairly close to Bozrah. All right. So then number two, Jordan has been allowing Israel to use their airspace in order to defend against Iran's attacks. So they had that whole attack by Iran, what, maybe 2 months ago, I think. And so the Jordan let the Israeli and I think Americans and who else was helping, into their airspace to shoot down these drones and missiles that were coming in. So that was interesting. Now, I mean, we've been waiting for like 20 days to see if Iran is going to retaliate for the latest, the assassination of the Hamas leader that was on their in Iran. And they are saying they are going to respond, at the time of place of their choosing. So I do think retribution is still pending. But again, so originally Jordan was saying they would let Israel use the airspace, and then there was, I think, a lot of outcry, and then they said, well, they wouldn't. But I think, sometimes they say things in public, but I think if push comes to shove, they still will allow them to use it. But the fact they're like helping Israel, so from being destroyed. Now, this was interesting because Jordan's population is 95% Muslim, and I think they're mostly the Sunni Muslims. But their constitution allows for freedom of religion. I was like, wow. And there is a small Christian population, like 4.2% of their population, and even Jews who live there, and they live peacefully together. And again, when you say, well, I don't really hear too much about Jordan, yeah, I don't hear about a bunch of Christians being slaughtered or Jews like we hear about, like currently in Nigeria, severe persecution breaking out by Muslims against uh, the Christians. And oh, what was that other country? Was it Bangladesh? One of those other Asian countries recently where the Muslims were slaughtering all these Hindus. So there's all sorts of stuff that's going on that you hear about. Well, a lot of it I don't think you hear about too much, but but anyways, but the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, not Saudi Arabia, of Jordan is also a refuge of thousands of Christian Iraqis who fled persecution. So, and they've also opened their borders, allowed in, I think a lot of Syrian refugees, probably mostly Muslims, but they seem to have this mentality of we need to help out other people and we have this freedom of religion. Now, the guy who's currently the king of Jordan is Abdullah. And this was just really fascinating finding out all this information about him. So, in fact, his wife, Queen Reina, I should have had a picture of her. She's like a real knockout, like very beautiful. They don't require any sort of hijab or head covering. I think some people choose to do that, but they don't have to. But there's a picture of him there. And he's been in power since, okay, it was like, he was born in 1962. He became king in 1999. And then, so he's still there. And he's supposedly of a 41st generation direct descendant of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Okay, so that's a little bit there, but some of the stuff that's interesting. Well, he did write a book, and I ordered this book, but it hasn't come yet. But it did look really interesting because he wrote this book. It's on Amazon. Our Last Best Chance: The Pursuit of Peace in a Time of Peril. So this is back to 2011, but I'm like, just kind of curious to see what would be his perspective on this. So, so he did write this book. He was let's see, he went to school like I think it was 5 or something. He was really young. He was sent over to the United States to go to school, and then he went to military school uh, in England. So, so just some interesting stuff there. But the other thing is he's known for promoting interfaith dialogue and a moderate understanding of Islam. So he's not down with all this terrorism and stuff. So it says the longest serving current Arab leader, he is custodian of the Muslim and Christian religious sites in Jerusalem, a position held by his dynasty since 1924. So I'm like, well, wait a second. So he's like in charge of the whole Temple Mount and all that? Like, I didn't realize that. So now I'm like, okay, well, the Antichrist is going to have to be including Jordan in their covenant, because I think that covenant with the many that the Antichrist does is going to allow Israel to rebuild the temple. So like I said, they're ready to go. And then he also had this thing he put out called the Ammon message. Let's see if I can find that really quick. Yeah. Now, he put out this whole document. He got other countries basically to sign on to it and so forth. But it is several pages long. I'm not going to obviously read the whole thing. I'm just going to read this one thing because he's basically trying to, it's almost like an ecumenical sort of like, let's blend everybody together. Whatever you want to do is fine. And let's all just get along. And I'm going to read starting here at this point. Together, these are principles that provide common ground for the followers of religions and different groups of peoples. That is because the origin of divine religions is one, and Muslims believe in all messengers of God and do not differentiate between any of them. Denying the message of any one of them is a deviation from Islam. This establishes a wide platform for the believers of different religions to meet the other upon common ground for the service of human society without encroaching upon creedal distinctions or upon intellectual freedom. For all of this, we base ourselves upon his, meaning Allah, saying, the messenger believes in what has been revealed unto him from his Lord, as do the believers. Each one believes in God and his angels and his scriptures and his messengers. We make no distinction between any of his messengers, and they say, we hear and we obey. Grant us your forgiveness, our Lord. Unto you is the journeying. And I guess that's from the Quran. So, now as a Bible believing Christian, I don't agree with that all religions, are the origin of divine religions is one. I disagree with that. And so I've heard even Jewish people saying, oh, well, like we're all worshiping the same God, like Allah is the same God they're worshiping. And it's like, I don't agree with that. I think the God of the Bible is very distinct, and that is the true God. And all these other, quote, religious leaders and so forth are false gods. So, but I did think that's an interesting perspective, and he really does seem to be trying to promote peace and not persecuting people, and like I said, providing sanctuary to Christians being persecuted and so forth. So, the conclusion. So, biblically, everything seems to point to a Muslim Antichrist coming from Turkey. It seems clear that the area delivered from the hand of the Antichrist is the region of modern day Jordan, corresponding with ancient Ammon, Edom, and Moab. Wait, let me make myself big again, since I think we're done with all the, whoops. Okay, somehow oh, well, I don't know. I can't seem to get, there we go. Sorry, I couldn't get my little things to pop up there. All right, so King Abdullah has offered refuge to persecuted Christians fleeing Iraq, plus freedom of religion is guaranteed by their constitution, with Jews, Muslims, and Christians apparently living together peacefully. King Abdullah has also opposed terrorism and believes all religions have the same source and everyone should be able to coexist. Furthermore, they did help Israel during the recent attack by Iran by allowing them to use Jordan's airspace in order to defend themselves. And Bible scholars have long postulated that the remnant of Jews who flee during the midpoint of the tribulation go to Jordan, possibly to Petra. So these are possible reasons why Jordan is delivered from the hand of the Antichrist, but I want to make it clear this is speculation on my part, and we will have to see how everything plays out. But to me, it was just very interesting and food for thought, because like I said, I didn't know any of that about Jordan. And I was like, very interesting. So, but it's amazing how the Bible tells us ahead of time the main outline of how these end time prophecies are going to play out. And I will say time seems to be getting short. And if you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, today's the day. The Bible tells us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's Romans 3:23. But thankfully, God sent his son, Jesus the Messiah, who came to earth. He was born of a virgin. He was fully God and fully man. He lived a perfect, sinless life. Then he was crucified unjustly, but he took all of our sins upon himself and paid the price for them as like the perfect Passover lamb sacrifice. And John 3:16 tells us, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. So I just want to encourage you, if you don't know Jesus, turn to him today as your Lord and Savior. Just pray, receive the forgiveness of your sins and his gift of salvation. And if you have any questions or if you need prayer about anything, just leave me a comment, or you can send me an email. I think my email is somewhere on my YouTube channel page, but and I'll be happy to get back with you about that. So, all right, well, we will see. Hope to see y'all in another week or so, and just have a blessed week and love y'all. Bye.